If you moved from one U.S. state to another tomorrow, your privacy rights would legally change overnight. Not your income, not your job, your privacy rights. And by the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why and exactly what to do about it. Most cybersecurity videos tell you the same three things. Use a strong password. Turn on two-factor authentication. Don't click suspicious links. Today, I am not going to spend time on any of that. Today, I want to slow down and walk through something bigger, something that quietly changed how your personal information is treated in this country without a single dramatic headline announcing it. Your data privacy rights are no longer the same from state to state. Depending on where you live, you may have serious legal control over your personal information, or you may have almost none. And most people have never sat down and actually understood why. Welcome to Cyber Safety Brief, where we explain simple cybersecurity advice for everyday Americans. This video is based on authentic, legal, and publicly available cybersecurity and privacy information. Everything here is for awareness and protection only. Nothing in this video involves hacking, unauthorized access, or anything illegal. This is purely about understanding your rights and protecting yourself in a system that is more fragmented than most people realize. Let's start from the ground up, because I think the foundation of this topic gets skipped too often. The United States has never passed one single federal law that governs how companies must handle everyday consumer data across the entire country. Europe has the GDPR, which applies the same way whether you're in Germany or Portugal. America took a completely different path. Instead of one national rulebook, individual states began writing their own privacy laws, one at a time, starting with California years ago. Then came Virginia, then Colorado, then Connecticut, then Utah. And the list has kept growing since, with new states joining and existing states updating their rules almost every year. In my opinion, this is one of the most underreported stories in everyday American life. We talk endlessly about data breaches, scams, and hackers, but almost nobody sits down and explains that your basic right to see what data a company has on you, to correct it or to delete it, literally depends on your zip code. That is not a small technical footnote. That is a fundamental difference in how privacy works depending on where you happen to live, and I think most people are walking around with zero awareness of it. So in this video, I want to go deeper than a quick overview. I want to actually walk you through how this patchwork works, why it exists, what it means for you personally, how businesses quietly adapt to it, and what practical steps you can take no matter which state you call home. Part 1. Understanding what a state privacy law actually gives you. Let's get specific, because vague statements like, "you have more privacy rights," don't mean much without context. In states that have passed comprehensive privacy laws, residents are typically given a handful of core rights. The right to know what personal data a company has collected about you. The right to request deletion of that data. The right to correct inaccurate information. And, in many cases, the right to opt out of your data being sold to third parties or used for targeted advertising. Here's the twist most people miss. These rights are not automatically active just because a law exists. You usually have to actively exercise them. A company is not going to proactively delete your data or stop selling it unless you formally request it through whatever process that state's law requires. So even in a state with strong privacy protections, if you never ask, nothing changes. The law creates the door. You still have to walk through it. Now flip that to a state without a comprehensive privacy law. In that case, this entire category of rights may simply not exist for you in any enforceable way. A company can be doing the exact same data collection and selling practices as they are in a state with strong laws, but residents in the state without a law may have no formal legal path to stop it, correct it, or even find out the full extent of what's being collected. What I personally think is that this creates a strange, quiet form of inequality. Same country, same apps, same internet, but a completely different level of control over your own information depending on your address. I don't think most Americans would accept that if it were explained to them plainly, but because it lives inside legal language and state legislative sessions that rarely make the evening news, It just exists quietly in the background of daily life. Let's talk about a real example that shows this isn't just theory. In California, a state with one of the strongest privacy enforcement systems in the country, a ticketing platform used by schools to sell entry for sporting events, plays, and dances was investigated for tracking visitors and using that tracking data for targeted advertising without giving people a proper way to opt out. California's privacy regulator stepped in, and the company was fined over $1 million, along with being required to change how it operates going forward. Think about what that case actually represents. This wasn't some overseas hacking group. This was a legitimate, everyday platform trusted by regular schools and regular families. And it still crossed a line because the pressure of a strong law made it worth investigating. In my opinion, that's proof that even the platforms we don't think twice about can quietly collect more than they should when there's no serious enforcement watching. And in a state without that kind of law, a nearly identical situation might never get investigated at all, simply because there's no clear legal violation to point to. So here's a first practical step. Take 5 minutes this week and search your state's name along with the phrase Consumer Privacy Law. Find out clearly whether your state has a comprehensive law or not. If it does, learn the 2 or 3 rights that matter most practically, usually the right to access your data and the right to opt out of having it sold. If it doesn't, that's not the end of the story either, because you still have some protections through narrower federal rules covering specific categories like health records or financial information, and you can still manually adjust privacy settings that many companies now offer more broadly, even to users outside protected states. Let me know in the comments if you already knew your state's privacy law status before this video. I have a feeling a lot of people genuinely don't. Part 2. How businesses quietly build 2 different versions of the same product. This next part is something most people never notice, even though it's happening constantly in the background of their daily digital life. Many companies that operate nationwide have started building different versions of the same website or app depending on which state a visitor is browsing from. If you're located in a state with a strong privacy law, you might see a clear cookie consent banner, an easy-to-find privacy settings page, or a visible link that says something like, "Do not sell my personal information." If you're located in a state without those laws, that same company might skip all of that entirely because they aren't legally required to show it to you. The way I look at it, this is one of the clearest, most concrete signs that privacy in America has become a patchwork system rather than a shared national standard. The company isn't necessarily doing anything illegal by treating visitors differently based on location. They are simply following the specific law that applies to each person based on where they happen to be. But from an everyday user's point of view, this creates a false sense that the internet behaves the same way for everyone. It doesn't, and most people never realize how differently their own browsing experience is being shaped compared to someone in a different state. What most people underestimate is how invisible this entire process is. Nobody tells you, hey, you're seeing a stripped-down version of your privacy controls because of where you live. It's simply missing, quietly, with no notification, no pop-up explaining why, nothing. You would only notice if you specifically compared your experience with someone using the exact same app in a different state, and almost nobody does that kind of side-by-side comparison in real life. Here's a practical scenario that illustrates this well. Picture 2 coworkers who both sign up for the same retail app on the same day. One lives in a state with a strong privacy law. The other lives in a state without one. The first coworker is shown a clear option to opt out of having their shopping history sold to advertisers. The second coworker never sees that option appear anywhere in the app, not because the company is hiding it maliciously, but simply because they are not legally obligated to display it to someone in that state. Same company, same app, same day. 2 completely different levels of visible control. I do not think this is about being paranoid or assuming every company is acting in bad faith. I think it's about being informed enough to know that the default experience you're given is not necessarily the full picture of what's technically available. What I personally think is that this is the #1 blind spot people have about their own digital privacy. They assume that if a setting isn't shown to them, it simply doesn't exist. Often, it exists. It's just not required to be shown to them specifically. A safe, practical step you can take right now is this. Go into the privacy or account settings of 2 or 3 apps you personally use every day. Look specifically for anything related to data sharing, personalized advertising, or third-party data selling, even if there's no obvious banner or big visible link on the main screen. Many companies bury an opt-out option deeper inside account settings to comply with rules from other states, and in some cases, they extend that same option quietly to all users nationwide, even if they aren't legally forced to. It costs you nothing to check, and you might find more control available than you expected. Part 3. The laws themselves keep changing, and almost nobody gets notified. This is the part I personally think deserves the most attention, because this entire topic is not a one-time situation you can learn once and forget. It's an ongoing, moving target. State legislatures across the country are actively introducing, debating, and passing new privacy-related bills on a rolling basis, year after year. Existing state privacy laws also get updated regularly, often with new obligations for businesses, tighter rules protecting children's data, and new specific requirements around how quickly and thoroughly a company must respond when a resident formally requests correction or deletion of their information. In my opinion, this constant movement is exactly why so many Americans fall behind on their own rights without realizing it. Nobody sends you a personal notification saying, "Hey, your state just passed a new privacy law. Here's exactly what changed for you." You typically only find out if you happen to stumble across a news article or if a company quietly updates its terms of service and sends you an email that most people scroll past without reading carefully. Let's walk through a realistic scenario to make this concrete. Say a state passes a new law giving residents the right to formally correct inaccurate information a company holds about them, a right that didn't previously exist there. If you don't know that this right now exists, you will never use it, even though it legally belongs to you the moment the law takes effect. Meanwhile, someone in a neighboring state who happens to follow privacy news closely might already be actively using that exact same right to clean up outdated, incorrect, or embarrassing information tied to their name across multiple platforms. What I personally think is that this creates an uneven playing field, not through anything sinister or deliberately unfair, but simply because privacy literacy varies enormously from person to person. The people who actively follow this topic get real, tangible benefits from staying informed. The people who don't, simply don't, even though the exact same law technically applies to both of them equally on paper. So here's a defensive habit I'd genuinely recommend building into your routine. Once or twice a year, set aside 5 minutes to search your state's name, along with the phrase "privacy law update." You don't need to read a dense legal document from start to finish. Just skim a reasonably reputable summary, usually published by a law firm's public blog, a consumer advocacy website, or a state government page, to see if anything meaningful has changed. This single habit alone puts you ahead of the vast majority of people who never check even once. I would also like to know your opinion here, because I think this is genuinely debatable. Do you think it's fair that privacy rights differ so much based on where someone happens to live? Or do you think this patchwork situation is naturally pushing the country toward one eventual federal standard? I'm genuinely curious what people watching this actually think. Part 4. Your rights don't necessarily travel with you the moment you leave your state. This next point is the one I find most overlooked in almost every conversation about this topic, and honestly, I think it's one of the most important. Let's say you live in a state with a strong, well-enforced privacy law. You've done the research. You understand your rights. You feel reasonably confident about how your personal data is being handled by the apps and services you use every day. But the moment you travel for work, relocate temporarily, or simply use an app while physically visiting a different state, the specific legal protections that apply to you in that moment can shift, depending on how a company defines your residency versus your current location at the time of use. This isn't something companies clearly advertise to consumers, largely because this specific area of privacy law is still genuinely catching up to how mobile and location-flexible modern life has become. In my opinion, this is one of the biggest blind spots in the entire national conversation around state privacy laws. We tend to assume our rights travel with us automatically, the same way our driver's license does. In reality, privacy protections in America are often tied more closely to where a company technically considers you to be located at a given moment, not simply where you're officially registered to live. A genuinely practical step here is this: don't assume your privacy protections are permanently locked in just because your home state happens to have strong laws on the books. If privacy genuinely matters to you, build the habit of directly managing your own device-level settings rather than relying entirely on legal protections that may or may not apply depending on your exact location at any given moment. Turn off ad personalization manually inside your phone's settings. Limit app tracking permissions directly on your device, which works consistently no matter which state you happen to be standing in physically. Regularly review which apps have ongoing access to your location, your contacts, and your general browsing activity. These specific device-level protections travel with you everywhere you go, completely independent of which state's particular law technically applies to you in that exact moment. Part 5. Small businesses are caught in the middle, and this affects you as a customer too. Here's an angle that almost never gets discussed, but I think it's important, especially since a lot of people watching this either run a small business or regularly support one. If you're a small business owner operating online and selling to customers across multiple states, you are potentially subject to several different, sometimes conflicting, privacy laws simultaneously, depending on where your customers happen to be located. That means a small business based in one state with relatively light regulation might still need to comply with much stricter rules the moment a customer from a heavily regulated state makes a purchase. In my opinion, this puts a genuinely difficult burden on smaller operations that don't have dedicated legal teams the way larger corporations do. A big national retailer can afford to build one complex system that automatically adjusts based on a visitor's location. A small, independent business selling handmade goods online often cannot easily do that, and many end up either applying the strictest standard to everyone just to stay safe or, unfortunately, remaining unaware that they're out of compliance with a law from a state they've never even visited. What this means for you as a customer is worth understanding too. If you notice that a small business you order from suddenly adds a clearer privacy policy, a cookie consent notice, or a new data deletion request form, it's very likely a direct response to expanding state privacy laws, not necessarily something they wanted to add voluntarily. I don't think this is a bad thing at all. I think it's actually a positive side effect of the patchwork system because it slowly pushes even small businesses toward better privacy practices, even if the original motivation was legal compliance rather than genuine concern. Part 6. What still protects you even if your state has no comprehensive law? Before we wrap up, I want to address something that worries a lot of people once they realize their own state doesn't have a comprehensive privacy law. If that's you, I don't think you should assume you have zero protection at all. There are still federal-level rules that apply nationwide, regardless of which state you live in. They're just narrower in scope than a full comprehensive privacy law. For example, there are existing federal protections around specific categories of sensitive information, including certain health records and certain financial information. There are also federal rules that apply broadly to deceptive business practices, meaning a company that lies about how it handles your data or fails to follow through on privacy promises it publicly makes can still face consequences at the federal level, even without a specific state privacy law being involved. In my opinion, people often overlook this because it doesn't come packaged as a neat, easy-to-understand consumer right. It's scattered across older, more general laws that weren't originally designed with today's data-driven business models in mind. What this means practically is that even in a state with no comprehensive law, you're not completely unprotected. You just have to rely more on general consumer protection principles rather than a specific, dedicated privacy statute. A simple and genuinely useful step here is to pay close attention to a company's own written privacy policy, because if they make a specific promise in that document and clearly break it, that gap itself can sometimes become grounds for a complaint through broader consumer protection channels, even without a state-specific privacy law backing you up directly. If this video is helping you understand how deep this topic actually goes, take a second to like the video and subscribe to Cyber Safety Brief. We regularly break down real cybersecurity and privacy topics exactly like this one, in a simple, practical way, without the fear-mongering and without the confusing legal jargon most explanations bury you in. So let's step back and connect everything we've covered. America does not currently have one unified national privacy law. Instead, it has a growing, evolving patchwork of individual state laws, which means your actual privacy rights depend heavily on where you happen to live at any given moment. Some states hand residents real, enforceable control over their personal data. Other states still leave significant gaps, with far fewer formal protections in place. Businesses often quietly adjust what they show you based on your specific location, usually without any visible explanation. New laws and meaningful updates are happening on a rolling basis, and most people never find out their rights changed until much later, sometimes years later if they ever find out at all. And even genuinely strong state-level protections don't automatically follow you the moment you're physically located somewhere else. On top of all that, small businesses are quietly caught in the middle of this patchwork too, often shaping the privacy experience you get as a customer without you ever realizing why. In my opinion, none of this should leave you feeling powerless or overwhelmed. I think it should do the opposite. Once you genuinely understand how uneven and fragmented this system actually is, you can start taking small, practical, repeatable steps that work no matter which state you happen to be in. Check your state's specific privacy law status directly. Review your app and device settings manually instead of passively waiting for a company to hand you options on a silver platter. And build the simple habit of checking for meaningful updates once or twice a year so you're never caught off guard by rights you didn't realize you already had or quietly lost without noticing. Stay alert, stay informed, and stay safe online. Before you go, comment below and tell me honestly, did you already fully understand your state's privacy law situation before watching this video, or is a lot of this genuinely new information for you?